Okay, we're live now. It's all right. I don't mind being a guinea pig for advancement. Okay, so my name's Emily Faulkner. I'm actually a nurse practitioner. I've been on maternity leave for a little over a year now, so enjoying my time with my little one. And I have a passion for functional medicine, holistic, like botanical medicine. So not your traditional family nurse practitioner, but that's my background. And have a few disclosures, just that I'm the owner of the Farmstead Forum. It's a small business that I founded 2 years ago. I'm also an Amazon affiliate. If you choose to visit my website, I have some book links and such on there. So those are my only two disclosures to make. So my parents actually grow and tend the muscadines that we use for wine. So I was going to talk a little bit about that. My father bought them from Ison's. It's kind of outside of Sonoa. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that nursery, but they have a lot of fruit trees. They're actually one of the largest, I think, in the world, like very, very a big producer of the muscadine vines. And they just ship them to you bare root. My best advice, though, is if you do choose to order them, don't order them with your fruit trees. Place it in a separate order because they'll ship them all to you in the spring. And from what I encountered, it was better to plant them in the fall when it's not so hot. So, but they do have a great selection. And so my father takes care of the vines. He prunes them late in the winter, and then my mom and I harvest them in around August, September. So we see. Okay. So when I first offered to teach this class, I asked Tracy, I said, well, do I need to actually talk about growing the muscadines, or could we just talk about making the wine? She said, you probably need to talk about growing them too. So when you're picking your varieties, you need a female variety and a self-pollinating variety. In nature, they can be male, female, or self-fertile. So or they're female or male in nature. So, and only the female ones bear fruit. So, but when you're going to Ison's, you're going to pick female variety and self-pollinating variety. The basic suggestion for planting, and y'all should have a piece of paper on your table that talks more in detail about planting, like if you're serious about starting to plant muscadines. That's directly from Ison's website, and they have a lot of great info on there. But they suggest about 3 rows of female varieties and then 1 row of a self-fertile variety. And they can be at least within 50 feet apart or spaced in the same row if you don't want to plant that many rows, but for them to have enough cross-pollination. And the downside of just the female vines is that they have a lower and inconsistent yield, but they are a larger fruit size. Okay, hope y'all can, okay, good. So these were the 3 best, I don't know if I'm going to mess up the recording here. These were the 3 best wine varieties that I found. The Noble Muscadine, you can see how dark it is and rich. I actually talked to a winery in Warm Springs. I like talking to the wineries and kind of getting to know the people that make the wine there. And he said that the Noble Muscadine is the highest of any fruit in antioxidants, which was really interesting. So if you're thinking of choosing your muscadine from a health perspective, it is very rich in antioxidants. They're very productive. It's a self-fertile variety. They're disease resistant. I know we've purchased some Noble Muscadine, and that actually has done really well for us. And it's also the leading red wine cultivar. So your second choice would be Terra, which is also, I would call it a scuppernong. I don't know, instead of a, white muscadine, us Southerners will say scuppernong, but it is a white muscadine. It's self-fertile. It's also disease resistant. It has very large fruits. The only negative is sometimes the flavor can be off from season to season, and that can happen within the same season or in between. So that's one downside of picking that one. And the last one would be the Carlos Muscadine, which is more of a bronze-colored juice when you when you press out the mash. They do have healthy vines, but they are prone to berry rot. Okay, so I went straight to the source for info as far as how's the best way to plant your vines. So most of this is on the sheet that y'all have, but Isons, like I said, is actually in Brooks, Georgia, and you want to plant your vines in the fall, about 16 to 20 feet apart between the vines, and 12 feet between your rows. You want at least 3 inches deeper than the highest root on the plant, and then you identify the longest vine or runner, and you train that vine up your bamboo pole that you can use to support it. And then all the rest of the runners you're going to prune off of that vine, that main runner. Let's see. So they suggested using a cane pole to tape the vine to, and they also sell these little vine shelters, which are these little blue, if you can see these little blue plastic casings around the base of the vine. So they sell those separately when you're placing your order, but they suggest those because it creates like a greenhouse effect inside of that, the vine shelter. It also keeps, if you're going to spray any herbicides around the base of your plants, it keeps the herbicides from coming into contact with your vines. And then also, because it's like a greenhouse inside that little shelter, you're going to get less suckers that will be able to, offshoot. If you don't put it on there, you're going to have a lot of suckers you have to prune. That's what I meant to say. So your first year is really going to be just training it up to your trellis. And then the second year is when you're going to see the fruits of your labor. There's a couple ways that you can trellis muscadine. Most of the time you're going to see the one-wire trellis, mainly because it's more cost effective and it's a lower trellis, so you don't have to worry about reaching up higher when you're harvesting. I personally chose to do the Geneva double curtain with my failed muscadine experiment in our pasture. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But basically, the Geneva double curtain will increase your fruit yields. It creates 2 parallel curtains, which are each supported by a load-bearing wire. And this wire that you have to run is the bulk of the cost. I think we spent probably about $200 just on the wire for two runs. But I would say that if you're looking for boosting your fruit production, here I go. I don't mess up the recording. Okay. But I definitely like this idea because it gives you more sunlight exposure and more fruit set because of that. So you get better vine maturation and increase your yields by about 50% per plant. So the negatives I already talked about was the cost. You do need a vigorous variety, so that's something not prone to, powdery mildew and some of the ones like I mentioned, but the Noble would do good on this one. And the other downside would be that it's a tall trellis. But I have seen one winery that uses a similar method, and there is a benefit for using animals in your vineyard to help with fertilizing and that kind of thing. I'll talk about that too. But your one-wire trellis is probably going to be the more common one to use just because it's cheaper to build it. But you would just use the 9-gauge wire, 8-inch pressure-treated post, and then bracing on either end. Okay. So I put this slide in there because the biggest thing that you have to do when these vines are young is to water them. I did not water mine because they were down in the pasture and they depended on me to haul the 25-gallon tank down there. So mine all died. But I also planted them in the spring because that's when my fruit trees were all shipped to me. And so it was just not a good story. But the first 2 years is critical, and I put this slide also just so you could consider installing some sort of drip irrigation to take most of the work off of you in the long run. Because let's see, developing vines need 24 gallons of water per week, and this is from Ison's. Established vines, 36 gallons of water per week, and that's just a lot of water to be hauling, especially if it's not close to your house. I will say my stepfather, who tends our vines, he did not install a drip system, but his is very close to the house. I'm sure just when they were first growing, he was diligent about watering them deeply, when they were getting established. But after they're established, they grow so well here in the South. Okay, and this was my prompt to remind y'all that I thought the handouts were going to be up front, so that's why I put that in there. Okay, let's get to the fun part. I just put this little quote in there. This is actually our vines here, and you can see my dad used the one wire trellis here, and he's got actually 3 rows. We've got this row, that row, and then one back over here. And then he actually put some blueberries and blackberries on either end where the bracing is located. But a meal without wine is like a day without sunshine. I don't know if any of you feel that way too about wine, but so we had these muscadines, and for years we made jelly with them. And I don't know about y'all, but there's only so much jelly that you can eat. So my stepfather said, y'all just need to do something with these muscadines. I'm tired of pruning them and taking care of them and seeing them rot on the ground. So this was around COVID, and my mom and I decided, we talked about making wine. And so we decided to start making wine around that time. And we called our wine business, not really the official business, Antioch Wine Company. And we did a workshop with a little wine tasting out of our house, so that was nice. We had about 8 people. It was just like an introductory where we, did the mash and mixed everything, and then we did the wine tasting. So that was fun to do. It's a great time that I spend with my mom. I don't think we make enough time to spend time with family these days, so it's just a fun hobby that I have to do with my mom. That's how we kind of got into it. Okay, so I created kind of a 10 steps to winemaking for our workshop. So I'm kind of going off my notes here, but I'm going to simplify it because it can be involved. It's not super easy making wine, I'm not going to lie. A lot of people say, well, I don't have a good place that I can make wine. I don't have a basement. If you find a cool closet on the north side of your home, you can ferment your wine in the closet or store it in the closet. So that's just a side note. I had one woman, she said, we don't even have air conditioning. I was like, well, that might be a problem, especially during the fermentation period. But a north-facing closet would do well. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is gather your supplies. Not all of these are necessary. I realize this is a lot. I have pretty much put in bold the things that I don't think you could live without. Your fruit of choice, of course, we're using muscadines for this illustration. We've made wine with blueberries, persimmons, pears, anything that we could grow or easily order. Like the blueberries we get from Azure. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Azure Standard, but they'll ship them to you in a big 30-pound frozen box. So it's a lot easier than going to harvest that many blueberries if you don't have them, if you don't grow them yourself. But so you pick your fruit out, and we use spring water, which is, we get it from Kroger, and it says it's ozonized. That's the big thing that you want to look for, is that it says ozonized. You don't want any chlorinated water because that will kill your yeast. So some people will use well water, and that's okay if it is a deep aquifer well. Pabella Winery in, I believe they're close to LaGrange. I'm trying to remember geographically. I've been there once. but they use a well for their winemaking. So you can use well water. You definitely cannot live without an auto siphon. That is what this thing is off the side here. You just lift this up a couple times and it starts the gravity suction. So I think an auto siphon is very beneficial. It makes things a lot easier. And also, of course, some sort of vessel. We've used 6-gallon plastic carboys. You could use a 1 gallon or a 3-gallon glass jug if you had it to make a small batch. Then you also need a bucket for fermenting in. I use a 10-gallon fermenter, but if you're just doing a 1 or a 3-gallon batch, you could easily use a 5-gallon food-grade bucket. Hydrometer is important if you're going to want to find out your alcohol content of your wine. It's a little tricky. Once you get the hang of it, it's fairly simple to figure it out. But again, I didn't put that you have to do it because some people don't care what their alcohol content is, or they can't figure out how to do it, so they just don't buy one of those. I think you don't have to have one of those. A thief, which is something that you use to test the wine. So before you're ready to bottle, you're checking different phases. The thief is just a device that you put down in the wine, and it traps a little bit of the wine in the thief without it draining back out because there's a valve at the bottom. So I think that's also important to have. And of course your bung or airlock, which is what this is on the top of this carboy. This is a 6-gallon plastic carboy. So this at the top is the bung with the airlock there. A mesh bag is used during the fermentation process. You, again, don't have to have that. I've made it without it. It just makes things a little easier during cleanup and keeping things separate. And then, of course, a long spoon or a ladle. If you're just doing a small batch, you may not need a 2-foot long spoon, but I've got a special spoon I use for that. Your additives, it depends on your recipe you're using. When my mom and I first decided to start making wine, we went on Pinterest, because where else do you go for ideas at my age? So anyways, just a little bit funny because I'm probably the youngest master gardener in here. So we found some great recipes on Pinterest, and they have a lot more of the additives that, maybe if your family used to make wine, like your grandfather or someone that didn't put all these additives in there. But you would need to grab your citric acid or potassium sorbate, those type of additives if you're going to add them. And then the yeast is important. Some people use baker's yeast, but honestly, the wine yeast are critical because they allow the alcohol content to be a little higher than what you would typically be able to do with just baker's yeast. And then, of course, depending on how fancy you're going to get, the rest of these things on our supply list are optional. Corks, your hand corker, bottles, heat guns, unnecessary if you're just doing it for your home, drying tower. And this part, though, is important. I should have put this in bold, is your sterilant. A lot of people fail at making wine because things get contaminated. It's real easy to do. There's bacteria over every surface we touch, and it can easily, a wild yeast can contaminate your batch after it's already fermented. So you do want to get something called Easy Clean is what I use. I just get it off of Amazon. So, I know that was a lot. So your second step is to sterilize, and we've talked about already what we use. I usually sterilize everything the day before, so that way it can have time to air dry. You want to sterilize everything from your siphon to your fermenting bucket, your carboy, the bung, the airlock, everything that you're going to use. You need to go ahead and make sure it's clean. And then step 3 would be where the fun begins, extracting the juice. And this was the fun part because during my workshop, I told everybody, I said, okay, everybody take your shoes off. We're gonna mash them with our feet. It was just a joke. But anyway, so we just use a wine bottle in the bucket, in a 5-gallon bucket. And We found it's easier to break the skins if you freeze the fruit first. What's interesting, last year we had a person talk and they said that you're not supposed to freeze muscadines for more than 3 months. I'm not sure what would happen if you froze it longer. We have done that before, but so I guess 3 months, this is the optimum use by date. You're going to freeze them, but it just makes it a little easier when you're going to mash them. So for persimmons, when we did persimmon fruit, we combined the sugar with the fruit the night before, so it had time for those juices to extract from the fruit, but you don't have to do that with muscadine. So after you mash up the grapes, you're going to transfer it to your mesh bag if you have one. It just makes it so much easier for cleanup. So that's what we prefer. It's a nylon drawstring bag, and it's reusable. I was throwing those away. I thought they were just a one-time use. You can actually wash them and then dip them in your sterilant and then hang dry and reuse them. So that's great because they're like 12 bucks a bag. Okay, and so for step 4, of course, depends on the recipe you're doing. We add our spring water. There are other additives you could add, like wine tannins, yeast nutrient, acid blend, pectic enzyme. Those are all options in some recipes that you might see. And some people will actually heat the water while they're trying to mix in the sugar. I've done that with some of the blueberry recipes I've used, and it does make things go a little faster, but you're talking about in a 10-gallon fermenter, you're talking about, heating up 6-7 gallons of water. So that's a lot to be heating up, and then imagine toting a hot pot of water down into a basement. So we don't always heat it up, but some people do. Okay. So step 5 is measuring the gravity, the specific gravity, which is what the SG stands for. This is kind of, if you just like a little bit of chemistry thrown in there. So you don't have to get too deep in chemistry to understand the gravity part of it, but you want to figure this out before you add the yeast. So in step 4, you're supposed to add everything but the yeast, because everything has to sterilize. Because you add a little bit of Camden into your batch to clean everything and remove any wild yeast in your mixture. So at this point, you've waited 24 hours and you're going to check the gravity. So you use the wine thief, and then you drop the hydrometer into the wine thief, and that's how you record it. It'll bounce up and float, and you can see where to record it. You just write it down on your recipe and just keep a note of it, because you have to check it again before you bottle. You can also check the pH, but I didn't start out with a pH meter. I will tell you, after a few wine explosions, I decided it was important to check the pH. But basically, if you get one, it's not that hard to check it, but maybe starting out, you don't have to add the expense. So your primary fermentation is the 6th step. Usually takes about 7 to 10 days for that to finish. You're going to mix the yeast to get it kicked off with warm spring water. You wait and let it soften for about 20 minutes, and then you stir it into your mixture. If you don't see any bubbling within about a day or 2, you have bad yeast, or you did something to it and it's not fermenting. So one time I mixed my yeast with distilled water instead of my ozonized water, and I think it did something to my yeast because I had to add more yeast to it. And for this big fermenter here, for this 10-gallon fermenter, you really only need 2 yeast packets. One pack can do 6 gallons, so I use just like 1.5 when I'm doing a big batch like that. I like to use Red Star Premier Blanc yeast for my red wines. And then I don't know if I mentioned this on my PowerPoint, I'm trying to just double check here. And then I do use another variety that's called Laufin K1 V 1116, and that one's good for white wines and Scabernet is what I use that one for. So you want to cover, after you mix the yeast in, you cover your mash so you don't have little critters crawl in there and ruin it. And you just stir it twice a day with a clean spoon. You have to sterilize your spoon after each time you stir it. You stir it twice a day, basically until the bubbling stops. Most of it will stop within about 7 days. Sometimes it takes a little longer, up to 10 days. And so sometimes I will check the gravity to make sure it comes down to about 0.99 on the hydrometer, just to make sure it's good for me to transfer. But the first time you transfer or rack the wine is around that time that the primary fermentation is done. So you're going to use an auto siphon. Some people just use a regular tube, and you run the risk if you don't invest in an auto siphon and you just try to use a tube and suck it and then stick it down in your vessel, you could contaminate your wine. And when you're doing a 25-gallon batch like this, that would make you cry if it all went bad. So I would suggest just getting the auto siphon because they're about $30. So, but please use an auto siphon. And you want to, when you're racking it, this is also when you would first remove the mash and squeeze all the juice out as much as you could. Some people will use a wine press. We have one that my mom got from, I think it's from North Mountain Wine Supply. It's not great, but it is a metal wine press. We do use that, and but some people can just do it by hand, so it's not too difficult to have to do it by hand, depending on if you have a big batch or a small batch. So you squeeze out as much as you can. Then you can decide if you want to compost your mash or make something called second wine. So I was reading a book, and it's a natural wine recipe book that I'll show you all a picture of, and it was talking about making a second wine recipe. So that made my ears perk up because you could use the same mash and make wine twice. So I would freeze some of my batches in plastic bags, and then you just add your ingredients as you would with a regular recipe. You have to sterilize it anyways with your Camden tablets. And then you're going to pitch the yeast just like it was a new fresh batch of wine. So it just has a little lighter flavor if any of you are going to try that. All right, so you have your mash. The pulp is removed now from your wine, and you're going to have to put the airlock on there. Make sure you use some of the sterilant water, like you were going to sterilize that's the type of water you put in the airlock. So and then you're going to have to let it sit. Okay, step 8. This period will last about 4 to 6 weeks for secondary fermentation. And honestly, wine is very forgiving. So if you forget about it for 2 or 3 months, it's just going to sit there and it will probably be fine. But I do try to get it off of what's called the lees as fast as I can within about 8 weeks. So when you first want to check it is around probably 4 to 6 weeks, and the gravity should be about 0.99 to 0.998. But really, if most of the bubbling, if you're not doing the gravity, most of the bubbling is stopped, because you can tell on the airlock it'll still be having bubbles. Then you can go ahead and transfer it around 6 weeks. And so the lees are what's at the very bottom. You can't see it as much in this dark picture, but towards the bottom of the carboy, after it sits, the top will be very clear, and then the bottom will have a thick layer of sediment. So that's what you do not want to transfer in your final carboy. So, and then at this point, you can add another Camden tablet per gallon. That's just an extra way to ensure that it doesn't re-ferment, or if you back sweeten the wine, sometimes it'll start re-fermenting. And so that's what you don't want to do, is bottle when you're still fermenting, because it will be fizzy and you'll have an explosion, and some people won't be your friend anymore if you gift them that bottle. My dad had quite a mess in his pantry one time. Anyway, he's still my friend. Okay, so the pH is important to measure because even if you get everything else right, the sulfites that you add, the Camden is a sulfite, if it's greater than 3.5, you're still running the risk of eventually renewed fermentation after you've bottled. So that is just a tidbit. Some people think that just because you can add the sulfite in there that it's not going to spoil or start re-fermenting, but it can happen. And then step 10 is back sweetening. We do this. I know the wineries don't do it, probably because their recipes are down to a science. Ours is always a little different because sometimes we have extra fruit, sometimes we have a little extra sugar. But when you're back sweetening, it's just optional depending on your taste. So I usually will rack the wine 2 or 3 times minimum before I'll back sweeten, and then I'll let it sit again for another 3 weeks to make sure it's not going to start fermenting again. And that's when I add my Camden. That's the way that I do it. We use white sugar. Some people use wine conditioner, or you can also use grape juice concentrate, like the frozen kind that you can get at Kroger. And if you're going to use sugar, I just put up here for you guys, my rule of thumb is 1/4 cup per gallon for semi-sweet and 1/2 cup of sugar per gallon for sweet wine. And then, like I said, you let it sit for another 3 to 4 weeks, and then you want to make sure you check your gravity again. And that's you're going to have an equation. That's how you figure out your final gravity. Use the first and the second readings. Don't forget, because you will forget at some point to write the gravity. You're like, darn it, I forgot to check it. Okay. And I did, Okay. Yeah, don't rush to bottle. It will explode on you. I actually, one year, it was peaches and pearls is what I thought was a fancy wine because it almost tasted like champagne, but no, it was still fermenting. So once I bottled it, I started having a few go off in my wine cellar. Oh no, I gave one to Dr. Harris. He's going to so sure enough, they were at dinner and he heard something explode and his wife hit the deck and he's like, oh, it's just Faulkner's wine. Don't worry about it. But anyway, so when you're bottling, you do treat everything sterile still because now you have a finished product and you're about to put it away. So you clean all your bottles, your corks, and you do, I use a hand corker. It's economical and it's super easy for you to do, sit down. And then also I put for y'all the size corks I use. I can also email the PowerPoint anybody that is interested. But I use this size cork. Different corks have a different shelf life. So some corks are good for 3, 5 years. Some are good for 10. So these ones are good for 10 years. Because believe it or not, I actually don't drink that much wine. So I still have wine from 2020 and 2021 in our wine cellar. And I'm not super worried about it exploding because, it should be good with my long lasting corks here. We talked about checking the gravity again. And there's something called a bottle filler. It just helps when you're filling. It attaches to your auto siphon and it has a valve on the bottom that'll help start stop when you're ready, so you're not making a mess as you're filling up your bottles. And if you want to be fancy, you can use the shrink capsules for the top of your wine. You just need a simple heat gun to apply that. It just gives it a finished look. And y'all can see how I did mine on the raffle table. That I did donate y'all 2 bottles of wine to 2 lucky people who get those raffles. And then if you're going to do labels, get really fancy. I've personally used Canva to create our label design, and then I just print them off online. They're usually around $1 or less per label, depending on how many you order. For your light colored wines, you typically want at least 3 months to age those, and 65 degrees or less is ideal, but temps up to 69 are not going to hurt the wine. We have a storage room, a closet, I think, in our basement design that's perfect for this. I don't keep it temperature controlled, but our basement is just cool enough where I can just leave the wine in there. It's dark. but it won't be damaged if it's a little bit higher. So this is the book I was telling y'all about. If you're more natural and prefer less additives, y'all can find this book, Wild Winemaking, at the library. It's in our West Georgia Regional Library, and he has a lot of great recipes, everything from like a habanero jalapeno wine to kiwi and all sorts of interesting recipes. But he does suggest, you know, different amount of sugar, but he doesn't use very many additives at all. And I did read in that book also about the second wine recipe I told y'all about. And if you can ferment your alcohol to a content of about 14%, you don't need sulfites. So as long as you can ferment it to that amount, which is pretty potent if you're a wine drinker, but you don't have to worry about your wine re-fermenting after bottling. So he does talk about that. And then of course y'all know that the growing information came from Ison's. I use this Bottle Your Brand website to make our wine labels. I also make tinctures for different herbs that I forage and grow, and I use them for those labels as well. They're a great website. And then label peelers, I found them through Amazon. I was paying a lot more on Amazon for my carboys, and I just decided to skip the middleman and go straight to the warehouse. So I think they're located in Idaho or Indiana, but they're very nice, great customer service. Can't speak more highly of them. And then these were just a few of the books, just some suggestions if y'all want to read a little more. I would just caution y'all, like I did, people in our workshop, do not suffer from analysis paralysis and think you have to have every single thing figured out before you jump in and try it, because you know, you can just learn from mistakes like I have and figure it out as you go. Okay, so I wanted to invite you guys, if you're interested, to meet some homesteaders, or if you're interested in doing more stuff yourself. We're partnering with the Ag Center for a harvest gathering dinner on August the 8th, and it will be $15. We're going to have meatloaf provided. It will be, I believe, from either Key Farms or another local farm. And y'all will just need to let Paula know or someone in the front office if you want to reserve a spot for that. Dr. Key is going to be speaking on food as medicine, and then we'll have a panel of speakers that will talk about community and how to create community wherever God's planted you. This will be just our third get together, but you'll bring a side dish as well, kind of like a potluck, hopefully whatever you grew in your garden this summer or whatever you want to make at home. Let's see. Okay. Anybody have questions? Yes. That is probably true. I stick to fruits just because, you know, it's what we grow. What specifically have you, like? Dandelions. Yeah. Dandelions. I've heard elderberry too. There actually might be a recipe in that wild winemaking book for that. Rose hips, all that. Yeah. Oh, and the question was that she had heard you can make wine from anything, including dandelion and rose hips. Yes. When you backsweeten wine, do you do it with a simple syrup or you just? So the question is, when I backsweeten, do I use syrup or sugar? I just put white sugar, just with a measuring cup, straight into my wine and give it a good stir. Has anybody in this room made wine before? Okay, don't be afraid. I know you back row Baptist. You can raise your hand. I did. Every bottle exploded. Oh no! Yeah, it's that pH probably. And what's interesting, so I guess depending on when you harvest the grapes, even the pH of the grapes will change. And I learned something, and this is off the topic. I learned something interesting at a wine tasting up in New York, that for wine to be organic in Italy, they not only have to grow it organically, but they have to harvest it in the right phase of the moon, which I would be interested to find out when that is for them. But side note. Yes.
We've heard a lot in the past about bricks. How
Yes.
much does the bricks content in the process?
So there is a way to check the alcohol content with a bricks meter. I'm not familiar with how to check it that way. I don't know if that answered your question really.
I think they were using it in reference to as the grapes were growing to see what the sugar content of the grapes were in the process, so to speak, as they grew. Yeah. Some of the wineries that we visited made a point to talk about the bricks content, checking the bricks as
to know when to harvest the grapes. I have not gotten that technical with our harvesting. Although that's a great idea, I never would have thought to do that. The question was, have we checked, or how does checking the bricks of the muscadine or the fruit determine when you can harvest the fruit?
Probably talk about 5, 6 about what is bricks, because not everybody will know what bricks is.
So we use bricks for gardening to determine the nutritional value of the plants that we're growing. I know with Ron Ayers, we did a little workshop. He does Carroll County Young Farmers, and we took the leaves of the tomato plant and checked the bricks level. So if the bricks is 12 or higher, you will have very little pest pressure in your garden. And the nutrient content of that plant is very high. I think we checked like parsley, cilantro; those were very low. But the tomato, he had actual plants here that when we checked the tomatoes. So I don't know if that made a difference. You know, how freshly cut it was versus being still, in the soil. I don't know how that affects it. But it is used for checking. I know more for liquor. People that make liquor, they use more of the brick scale versus the hydrometer. That's out of my realm. What other kinds of wines have y'all made?
You have your vines fenced in to keep the deer out, or how do you keep them out?
Honestly, the ones that my dad planted are so close to his house. He does have a fence, but the deer could jump over it. It's not, tall enough to keep the deer out. They don't come around his house. He just has a large open pasture area to the side. And I've never seen any deer in his yard. Yeah. They like my almond trees in our pasture too, because they're about bald. So I was going to tell y'all about a Instagram winery. It's called Antiquum Farmer, and they're out in Oregon, and they have a rotational grazing setup in their winery. All their vines grow straight up. They have them trained on like a wire cabling. It's not the double curtain method, but it's just a way to keep them away from the livestock. And they rotate pigs, geese, turkeys, chickens, and sheep, goats. They rotate all of those through their winery and do very minimal, herbicide spray. Everything's regenerative. It's amazing what you can do in that sort of setup. Any other questions? If you guys are interested, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a podcast. I talk mostly about homesteading stuff on YouTube. If you would like to subscribe on there, it would help us out. If you guys have questions about the Farmstead Forum, or if you would like the PowerPoint for this presentation, feel free to email me here, and I will get that. And that's it.